Hello, everyone. Um, it's 9 a.m. in New York, 3 p.m. in Paris, and 9 p.m. in Bangkok. So let's launch the pre-crisis market mapping analysis guidance document. We're going to be together for an hour and a half, starting with a quick roundtable and introduction, followed by a 20-minute presentation on the Pcmma, and it's a case study about a Pcmma exercise implementing in Niger by Oxfam. Q&A session for 30 minutes, and we'll be wrapping up with the Pcmma next steps. At the end, we'll ask you to take part in a short poll through WebEx. It will appear on the text box at the bottom right of your WebEx window. WebEx and logistics, so your mic are on mute to avoid background noises, so please leave them this way. As mentioned by Emily, if you want to ask questions to be addressed during the Q&A session, do so by written the end of the Pcmma presentation, which should be roughly at 25 minutes to 10 New York time. The webinar is being recorded, and the link will be shared afterwards by email and on the MICD group and STRAP website. Today we have the pleasure to welcome almost 200 people from 6 continents and 49 countries, from Nepal to Ecuador. So I imagine there will be no detailed roundtable, but just to idea of who is attending. So today's participants represent a wide variety of sectors. Many are predictably from the food security and livelihood sector, but there are also a number of high-level logistics people, finance, funding, and administration team members, as well as people with expertise in urban programming, social protection, cash transfer, microfinance, wash, nutrition, protection, gender, capacity building, disaster management, M&E, and I'm sure I've forgotten some of the skills we've gathered here. Coming from the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement, with IFSC and several national societies being represented from Australia, Spain, the Philippines, UK, and the US. Few agencies around the table, such as FAO, UNDP, UNICEF, UNHCR, and WFP. We have and consortia, such as ACAPS, the CALP, the SIP network, and also the START network, bodies such as ODI and several universities, independent consultants and students, and of course a lot of you work with NGO. So there are many for me to mention them all, but 2 will be, as they are organizing this event, so the IC and Oxfam. And so the organizer that I would like to quickly introduce, and also be today's speaker, Gregory Matthew, who is the Senior Technical Advisor for Emergency Preparedness and Response within the Economic Recovery and Development Technical Unit in IRC. Emily Sloan, who is the Emergency Market Officer within the same department as Greg. Marilyn Hill, who is Emergency Secretary and Vulnerable Advisor and the Market Lead within Oxfam. Harold Reddy, who is a market communication, learning and advocacy officer, also with Oxfam. I'm a version of the Pcmma, and I'll be the facilitator for this webinar. Of the webinar, let's jump straight in, and I'm passing it on to Greg for the introduction.
Yeah, hello everybody. Can you? This is Greg Matthews from the International Rescue Committee. As Ellen just mentioned, welcome to a webinar on the pre-crisis market mapping and analysis tool. So before we get into a description of what the Pcmma is and how it's relevant for you, a bit of background of where this came from. The idea to do market analysis prior to emergencies has kind of been around since when the Emma toolkit was written and drafted in 2010, and the idea in the back of many people's minds for most of the last bunch of years. The traction on this idea probably in 2012. This the undertook a Pcmma focused on preparedness and disaster risk reduction programming in Myanmar. That experience from USAID OFDA to support one piece of a grant would be to focus on developing a set of guidance on using the Pcmma toolkit in pre-emergency context for preparedness. Around the same time, Oxfam was exploring this idea as well, and the funding from ECHO under a preparedness-focused grant in consortium with Save the Children, Concern Worldwide. And at the time, in 2015, the IRC and Oxfam really started putting our heads together about how can we do a set of guidance for applying market analysis tools pre-emergency or baseline context. The rest of 2013, Oxfam then developed led by Emily Henderson, developed a baseline guidance tool, which is the precursor to the existing Pcmma guidance. Initiated several exercises to try out that baseline guidance. All of this experience together, we decided to come back together, and IRC and Oxfam collective experiences together and collaborated really quite closely in developing the existing version of the pre-crisis, the Pcmma, as a step-by-step guide. Now, this guidance, Ellen, you can go to the next slide. This that we've developed, the Pcmma, is really our best guess at how to do market analysis in pre-emergency situations. On the limited experience which we have so far in doing analysis prior to emergencies, with a specific focus on being better prepared for those crises. The pilots which Oxfam has done in several different countries, the IRC's work in Myanmar, and the IRC's experience in guiding the Pcmma process for several years, and it's all together in our best guess at how to do market analysis before emergencies. Pcmma, as it is designed now, is intended to be revised. We recognize that it's not a perfect set of guidance, and we are actively looking, we're revising this guidance tool later this year. We'll talk about that revision process later, but to say that this launch event is also intended as motivate all of you to use the guidance tool, to use the Pcmma, and share your experience and learning from doing so, so that we get this a better guidance in the next 12 months. I also wanted to thank several people. This Pcmma would not be where it is now if it wasn't for the great initiative of Emily Henderson, who I don't know if she's on the call today. Those people who worked on earlier versions of the tool, as the numerous people who provide in thoughts and ideas through the whole development process. This was an enormous task over the better part of a year and a half. And just to thank all of you who were involved in this, it's a great achievement for everybody involved.
Shall I take it from there? For the next 20 minutes, I'll talk you through the what, the why, the when, the who, and the how of Pcmma, hopefully highlighting its key feature and added value. Looking at the what, so the Pcmma is a market analysis guidance document. So it analyzes market system and its need with market capacity. It is a guidance, not replacing any of the existing methodologies and tools such as Pcmma, Pcmma, RAM, and MAC. the same tools as the Pcmma process, such as the gap analysis, the seasonal calendar, and market maps. So the Pcmma provides field team leaders across the different sectors practical step-by-step guidance of how to plan, carry out, and update a pre-crisis mapping and analysis of selected critical markets. So market analysis is part of the broader situation analysis. By information on how market systems function, it can support response design and therefore preparedness, early warning, and relief operation. However, Pcmma is not a standalone exercise, and for example, if you are designing a comprehensive preparedness plan, you probably have to collect all baseline information, such as information on livelihoods, food consumption, water quality, household income, etc. And for you'll need to use other tools, other methodologies, such as an HEA. You may need to do as well a need assessment. And Pcmma covers the existing supply and income market system, the ones that are already part of people's livelihoods and basic needs coverage, but it does not cover new market opportunities. That's that the critical market system you'll select for your analysis will have to be existing systems. And it can be used to design disaster risk reduction, preparedness, and early warning measures to be implemented before the crisis. So this includes market strengthening action that will support some market actors or services mitigating the impact a crisis could have on this particular market system. Pcmma exercise can also be used to design future relief and early recovery responses in case a selected crisis happen. So it helps agency in designing its programming, but also in widening response options. Looking at the why a Pcmma? So understanding the capacity and constraints of critical market system your target population rely on for the coverage of their basic needs before a crisis can improve timeliness and effectiveness of the emergency response. Those resources whose design is based on the Pcmma results will be to-aware responses. So the graph put there is from South Sudan and display a food drop operation. The point is, of course, not to discuss the relevance of such type of modality, but to highlight by comparison the potential advantages of market-aware responses. So market-aware could have multiple advantages because it due to markets, it can boost the local economy, traders to lose their businesses, increase the sustainability of the intervention, and sometimes it will also help agency to gain access as that are accessible for traders that are not for humanitarian agencies. By understanding critical markets before crises happen, the agency can also select some key market indicators to monitor and give information on the unfolding of a crisis. So market indicator could be integrated into early warning system, and early could then trigger early action. From the initial market analysis is done, programming option can be designed and implemented so that certain part of the market are strengthened, helping to support access to basic need and livelihood, so they could potentially better withstand shocks. This begin to address long-term or chronic nature of vulnerability and poverty in some contexts. So this market analysis may have several objectives, and I'm giving you here an example of Pcmma objectives. So it can be to improve your agency preparedness to respond to forecasted crisis by understanding the impact it will have on critical market system. 2, it can support contingency planning exercise. 3, it can mitigate the impact of a forecasted crisis by strengthening some part of the market systems. 4, you can want to have a baseline picture of how critical markets function when they are not under stress, meaning during non-crisis time or during reference time. Build resilience, but also as a 6th objective, one we often forget, used to build staff capacity in market analysis and change approaches and attitude toward market-based programming. Set the objective of your Pcmma, you'll define the question you want to answer through this exercise. So those questions can be about A, the capacity of market systems to cover volume and diversity of need of the population during the identified crisis scenario, B, people access to this market during the time of crisis, see the impact of your standard humanitarian response on markets and on people access to those markets, the relevance of an emergency response, ensuring the recovery of market system, and supporting the increase of people access to markets, or it can be the relevance of disaster risk reduction measure to increase people access to the market system, or to protect and strengthen the market system to decrease vulnerability to shock. The graph here, here on your screen, is one that is included in the Pcmma guidance. So in the blue box, you have a question you may want to answer through a Pcmma exercise. So those are about market capacity to meet the needs of your target population, either here, so that's the upright blue case, or the crisis you've started happen, so that's the up left blue case. They can be about the support your market system may need to be able to meet the demands. So in answer to those questions, you have different programming options that range from prepare activity to strengthen the market system, one in orange, and it goes as well to emergency responses to start preparing for in case the crisis happens. So that's the green boxes. Based on your Pcmma exercise, you could plan to deliver those future emergency response either in kind or cash transfer, and you could plan to implement indirect support through markets. So what do all those response options look like? So this table is based on Oxfam and WFP joint definition of market-based programming is. Only market-based programming within humanitarian setting, and it doesn't look at longer-term intervention or market development action or financial inclusion, because those beyond the scope of the response option a Pcmma could help define. If Pcmma could trigger such reflection. So to the market-based programming, so it's a cross-sector approach, meaning a WASH response, a shelter response, a food security response, or a multi-sector response can be market-aware. Speaking of market-based programming means to speak about three different things. It can be speaking about market-integrated relief, which is the left column, which you're working through the local market to deliver emergency response. So the delivery for this response could be either in kind with local procurement or through cash transfer. So there are examples of what it could look like of market integrated relief. For example, providing water voucher to refugee population in Jordan so they could gain access to safe drinking water is one. Doing conditional cash grant to typhoon affected population in the Philippines so build their shelter is another example. Or distributing food ration to GDP bought from the local market can be categorized as a market integrated relief operation. Column, which is indirect support to market, mean that your response through the local market, the market system, either market actor or market services, may need some support. If storage has been destroyed by a flood, your agency may support the rehabilitation of storage places, or access to credit has been stopped for small trade because of a conflict situation. Your agency may support the small trader with a cash grant or a loan. And the last column on the right is about market strengthening. So that's part of preparedness activity and not anymore about emergency response. So it's meant to boost the market ability to serve your target community in case a crisis hits. So all of this type of activity, but it's looking at support market actor or some of the market services to make us affected by future crisis. So now looking at the example we just discussed about storage places that are vulnerable to floods, you can think about the storage infrastructure by making them more flood resilient before flood happens. Where does Pcmma fit into this picture? So the assessment stage or contingency planning stage, Pcmma will allow you to analyze critical market system as part of situation analysis, and it will help you to design your response option that could fit in one of these three categories. And to answer one of the questions I've been asked several times about link between Pcmma and cash transfer programming. So one of the outcomes of a Pcmma can be that cash transfer programming is just the most appropriate modality to deliver your forecasted emergency response. So it can be a WASH, shelter, food security, or multi-sector humanitarian outcomes. There are still some questions to answer about Pcmma, like the when. So Pcmma can be used in context where rapid or slow onset crises are likely to happen in the future, hence the term pre-crisis, market mapping and analysis. So it doesn't cover market system analysis after a shock when there is existing baseline. It's appropriate to use in slow onset emergency when the impact of a hazard is imminent. So, for example, when early warning systems are all knowing that the drought is unfolding and will result in a food security crisis, Pcmma is not a relevant exercise to implement at that time. The Pcmma can be undertaken at any time of the year when it's needed to fit into your contingency planning or response design. Data collection can be done at any time, but the period for which the data is collected at the time of the year when disasters are most likely to strike, to account the seasonal variation. If the crisis you're looking at is a typhoon, and the typhoon season is peaking in August, so you'll collect August data during your assessment, but this can take place any time in the year, in October, September, whatever. I'm going to tell you about choosing the time for the analysis when the crisis scenario is one of the slow onset crises in the Niger presentation in a minute. This now. So as mentioned in the beginning, this guidance is aimed at field-level practitioner with analytical skills. So if need assessment or other market analysis could very well be used as well to implement a Pcmma. 4 types of role within the Pcmma team. The being the market focal point. So that's the person who's going to be responsible for the analysis for the preparation phase up till the use of the results. Focal point is an agency field practitioner, and she is not necessarily a market specialist, but someone who can ensure the buy-in from management and the follow-up of the work. The role is the analysis team leader, so it's the person responsible for the overall exercise. For her, experience of market analysis in human setting is critical. So the person can be the market focal point, but it can also be somebody else from the agency or even an external consultant. The role is the market team leader. So the team leader is responsible for one critical market system. It's not necessarily a market expert, but the person has to have good leadership, good communication, analytical skills, and program implementation experience. Looking at only one critical market, the analysis team leader and the market team leader can be the same person. And then we have the market team members. So in general, we'll be looking at 2 to 5 persons per market system to be high. So the number will depend on geography and also the time allocated. They know the area well, they will speak the local language, and they're in charge of the data collection, and they will support their market team leader with the mapping and the analysis of the market system. So those are not sectorial, and each role can be held either by a technical person or a logistician, a manager, etc. And even in practice, the team and the market focal point are program people. It's critical to involve support departments within the team to be able to draw from their knowledge of the market and of financial institutions in the. And so the final slide of my presentation about the how do a Pcmma. So as we mentioned already, Pcmma is not a alone exercise, and it should be done in the frame of your agency program strategy and contingency planning. The first step of the Pcmma exercise will be about understanding the context. So in this step, you will first determine the most likely shocks and threats that the population may face in the future, and you'll will define your crisis scenario using resources and literature to do that. Looking more specifically at your agency, you'll determine what your most likely response to this crisis. So what will be the targeted area, the targeted population, the period of the intervention, and the objective of your intended response. And then you'll identify the most critical needs your agency is going to address in case the forecasted scenario takes place. So step, which is the first step of the PCMMA, will help you to frame your Pcmma exercise. And the following steps are similar to the one you would follow for any type of assessment, meaning that you will set the scope and objective of the exercise, put together team, you're reviewing secondary data, collecting primary and qualitative data, and analyzing the results. Pcmma exercise is iterative, so it means you'll do your analysis on an ongoing basis as you're collecting the data. Once you've analyzed the results, you could design your responses and define market indicator to monitor. So step 13 of the PCMMA, and monitoring can be used for three different things. The first one can be used to update your market maps. It can be used to follow early warning indicator and trigger response when appropriate. It can also be used to monitor the progress of the response option you've implemented during the PCMMA exercise. Monitoring is different from updating, which is step 15. You'll need to update your analysis when your crisis has happened to do a reality check of the scenario you've built during the PCMMA exercise. You can also have to update your PCMMA when the context has changed in such a way that regular monitoring of the market is sufficient to have up-to-date information. So it could be, for example, a major change in trade regulation. So I'm now going to give the virtual floor to Mary, who will talk you through one practical illustration of a Pcmma exercise from Oxfam in there. So just bear with me a minute. So I'll work through the technology to give the floor to Mary.
Great. Okay, Hélène, I still can't see the slides, so I'm going to tell you when to change the slides. Okay? Okay. If I'm the presenter. Okay. I'm going to present an example of a Pcmma that was done in Niger in January 2014, so last year. That was about the maize and millet market. Next slide. About the context, so this Pcmma was done in the west of Niger, which is part of the Sahel region. So a pastoral area, which is called Walam, where Oxfam has long-term programs as well as humanitarian interventions. It's to recurrent drought leading to food insecurity, area of chronic poverty, chronic malnutrition, so the population is very vulnerable to drought. There's only one rainy season, so if that rainy season fails, lots of people are dependent on this only rain-fed agricultural season. So it will lead to a bad lean season. There are chronic issues of production deficit. So every year there are production deficits, especially of erratic climate patterns. So the crisis chosen was this bad lean season as compared to a normal lean season, which was actually a normal time. If you, as referred to what Eden has just presented in a Pcmma, you have your crisis, which would be your crisis, and you need to compare in bracket normal time. So crisis was a bad lean season, as a consequence to a bad last agricultural season, which means during this agricultural season there was a rainfall deficit or early end of rains, a dry or a pest attack on crops that damage crops, so people can't accompany, or floods having damaged crops. But that could also lead to a shortage of pasture for pastoralists. So was the most this situation in this area because of the cost, but also because of the mandate of Oxfam and of the group that's doing that, was taking care of food security. The markets. So in the preliminary phase, as well as you would do during an Emma, you choose your critical markets. So here it was decided to markets of meat and maize, different issues for different reasons. So the main issue identified was food insecurity. Food security was the main issue during bad lean season, so it was decided to look at food markets and two staples. Millet is a staple at all times in this area. Was actually very interesting in the framework of the Pcmma, because it's more and more consumed by every groups in this area during the lean season, but also before, as a substitute of millet. So it's cheaper, it's less preferred, but it's more and more consumed, and it's also an imported food, because there is not enough rain in this area to produce maize. So actually analyzing those two critical markets was very interesting to enable us to understand the consumption dynamics of both. And therefore, the idea behind was to draw indicators of crisis out of this. So knowing that when people eat maize, we know that starts to be a choice of a less preferred food. So we could look at what happens closely on those two markets. So as a EMA, during this primary phase, you choose your key analytical questions. And 4. The one was, what are the millet and maize market capacities to respond to the target population during a normal lean season and a bad lean season? So here you recognize the two different seasons, the crisis season, crisis time, and the normal time, and the usual question that you have in a market mapping and analysis, which is comparing market capacity with needs. But here projecting what will happen during the next crisis, asking traders about what happened during the last bad lean season. So, question was, what are the early warning indicators of bad lean season, market functioning? Here, a very strong emphasis in this Pcmma was trying to draw early warning indicators based on the way market functions. And we managed to actually pull out some very interesting indicators. Commodities that substitute for traditional staples for target population during these two periods as well. Here again, the idea was to think about indicators of a bad lean season based on what people are consuming. Then the fourth question was, which are the months experiences important price increase in a normal and in a bad year? And here you can see also that the idea behind was to have some early warning indicators and things that could be monitored in terms of when this is increasing. So Ellen, you can move on to the next slide. I don't see it. You can see the that you're all familiar with, which is a piece. So you can see that a Pcmma map looks like an EMA map, or a map that you have in a GEM. In the top you have the market environment, institutions, norms. In the middle you have the market chain with different actors. So here you had the producers, collectors, wholesalers, retailers, and then you can see highlighted in pink the target population, which were the groups of the very poor in this rural area. And bottom, you can see also the usual infrastructure, services, and resources, inputs and resources needed to support this market. That's the normal lean season. That's how the market functions. I'm not going to go into the detail here, but just for you to see it. And then on the next slide, you can see that the same map, the same market system during a bad lean season. Also represent visually the same we would do in a, which is so how crisis impacts on the market system. Partial disruptions, for example, collectors. I'm sorry you can't see it very well, and it's in French, so I don't know if everyone can see it very well. But so you have collectors who actually are removed or are very, very rare because there's no more local production. So the middlemen, those collectors, middlemen, are the absent market chain. Also, there are issues around local production, of course. But very interesting is that you have actually more tailors in this area in the weekly markets, because local traders were not able to meet the demand because people having not have produced enough cereals, they would buy more cereals and earlier. So some outsiders, traders would come to the opportunity for more sales. Findings which answer to the fourth question about the month's experiences price increase, that in a normal year, price increase happens from the month of April or May. We talk about price increase on food commodities. And that year, price actually never drop as they should do after the harvest period, which is around October, this area of Niger. Our price start to rise as early as January, which is very, and which is a sign of a bad year, which is very easy to monitor. And that's what we want to emphasize in this case study. Is here we drew some very interesting early warning indicators of a coming bad lean season, and that's one of the strengths of a Pcmma, is to draw early warning indicators. On demand, the demand increases earlier, which means that as early as January instead of the usual month of April, local population was asking more cereals because they had not produced. So big stocks of maize on rural markets as January or December, and that's also very easy to monitor because you can just monitor when you have stocks of maize that are going bigger than the stocks of millet on the local markets. You can see that people ask for more maize and millet, and that's an indicator of a bad lean season already starting. Also of cassava flour, which is preferred and cheaper food. So when you see there's more demand of cassava flour, you see that there is also of a bad year. If prices trends, early price increase or no price decrease, as I said, increase of maize and cassava flour, which should normally remain quite stable, are also very bad signs. Some effects on purchase on credit, more predictable, consumers asking to purchase on credit as early as January. But what was very interesting is we got months. So we got that in January or February, you need to start monitoring. And if you see that traders are talking about a lot of purchase on credit, it means people are already high stage of income, of money, and need to purchase on credit. Therefore, also some supply chain actors, so disappearance of this middleman, as I said, right after the harvest period, because there's no more local production to sell. Traders in rural markets, so those others that come to meet the demand that local traders can meet. So in terms of use, so this Pcmma has been used for proposal design, but to be used for preparedness, as we drew lots of early warning indicators, but also awareness of what happens, what are the impacts of a bad lean season market, but also the fact that traders are the ones that have lots of information on what's happening in an area, so they need to be loop of any preparedness or any monitoring activity. So, but what does it mean it's updated because a PA is done on the assumption that the crisis really a good picture of how the crisis is going to strike again on the market. So he took reference of the last bad season, which was in 2012, but it means that the next year we need to update the Pcmma. So we're not going to do another one, but we need to update it. And indicators that are pulled out need to be monitored regularly, of course. So that's it for this study. Thank you. To Hélène.
On the question you yes, so thanks, Mary. I'm now gonna take question from you that you've posted in the text box. So the first question we've got is about the link between Pcmma and Emma, and the question will be for Greg. So the question is, how do you see Pcmma and Emma correspond to each other? My understanding so far from the PowerPoint is it looks like it will be easier and quicker as to implement a Pcmma. So Greg, the floor is yours.
This is a really good question, and one which we discussed at great length when we were writing the Pcmma. The Pcmma is intended to be a guidance on how to apply emergency market analysis approaches such as Emma or Mafia or the RAG tools, how to apply those in pre-emergency context. So we don't see the Pcmma as replacing any of those tools, but as being a guidance on how to use those before emergencies happen. So, and the Pcmma can, when done in advance of an emergency, can absolutely support the assessments after an emergency hits, can speed up the amount of time it takes to do those post-emergency analyses. And it's intended to also look at not just baseline to design response programs, but to look at how to put in place risk activities or market strengthening interventions prior to an emergency, such that when disaster does happen, those markets are more resilient and better able to withstand crisis. Applying not just the types of responses which would be appropriate after an emergency, but also the weakness within a market system now in a baseline to address those weak points so that the markets are stronger and better able to respond after an emergency.
Greg, the next question will go to Mary, and it's about when, so I said in the presentation that the Pcmma is necessarily useful in slow onset crisis. So could you tell us a bit more about how to use Pcmma in a rapid or slow onset crisis? Is it appropriate?
Okay, hi again. Actually, I think saying it's not useful in rapid or slow onset crisis is slightly a misunderstanding. What we're trying to say here is Pcmma is intended to be used in situations before a crisis happens. What does it mean? It means that you need to be in a context in a country where you have recurrent crises happening. So it could be slow onset crisis or rapid onset crisis. So that could be in Bangladesh, where you know that every second or third year you're going to have a big cyclone. but you recurrent enough for you to know that you will have to face to counter rapid onset crisis, and you want to be prepared, so it's going to be fed into your contingency planning. Onset crisis, it's a little bit more complex. There is a question of when there start the slow onset crisis. So when should we do the PCMMA, and when is it too late to do a PCMMA? What we like to say is that, of course, in a slow onset crisis context, as my example of Niger, it's very relevant to do a PCMMA. If the crisis has already been forecast and is already being unfolding, and the situation has already changed, then it's already too late to do your PCMMA, because you're already in the emergency situation, and what you want to do Pcmma, how was the market functioning before, how is it now. So, the most important point is that you should do your PCMMA whenever the crisis has not happened yet, but it has to be predictable.
We'll take the next question for Greg. The question is, how does Pcmma take into account how markets have coped, stretched, and been impacted by previous crises, the status of the time of assessing pre-crisis, like seasonal variation, fluctuation, etc.?
Hi. So this is a really good question, and the answer is about the nuts and bolts process of how the pre-crisis information is collected. So how the assessment is, as Marie was just describing, the pre-crisis market analysis, it's based on an emergency scenario, or what you think the type of emergency is going to happen, what type of emergency you think will happen. And then that emergency context and going to the market traders or all of the other market actors and saying, how do you anticipate you will respond? What types of changes will you need to make in your business practices, in your relationships with other aspects of the market chain, and will to continue to provide the same level of goods or services which you're providing now, or you have to change and other lines of business, or how will this emergency affect your business and the ability to deliver the goods and services which you currently are providing. What happens is that it's often very difficult to ask traders what to do in the future, and instead the conversation is more focused around in the past, when you've been in this situation, how have you behaved? And so by going through a series of questions examining how market actors have worked in past circumstances where they're stressed or where there's been a shock, we can begin to understand how those markets have behaved, coped, as the question says, and the types of market, including positive changes. Maybe there's things that are happening in a positive way when an emergency happens, for the markets to continue to function. And so we can identify what those are and anticipate how those will happen in the future, based on the severity of the emergency which we're anticipating.
Greg, the next question will go to Emily, and so it's about the hypothesis we made the Pcmma improve the efficiency and efficacy of emergency response. Asking the question can see that this is likely, but was wondering if there has been any work done to verify this hypothesis, and if any evidence on comparison between emergency response that benefited from a Pcmma compared with a response that didn't.
So I'm going to answer this question with a bit of an agenda, which is to say it's a good question. but we need input from people like you to be able to answer that question. PCMMA is relatively new. The guide was published less than a year ago, and even for that, some people have been sort of dabbling with pre-crisis assessment, so using, for example, the Pcmma tool or other market assessment tools in a pre-crisis context, but it's still relatively new, and there's no strong body of data or evidence on this type of assessment. Our goals for the coming year is to improve that situation, to follow up with people who have been involved with both specifically PCMMAs and other types of, pre-crisis assessments using other market tools, and to gather some feedback, gather some thoughts, get some minds thinking on that, and then to use that both to sort of inform pre-crisis market mapping and assessment guidance going forward, to guide sort of what we should be more explicitly when we do these assessments in the future. So this might be one of those topics that we would want to look at in more detail, but I can see that it would take a bit of time because one of the reasons is, pre-crisis assessment by nature is done before a crisis. You would then have the crisis unfold, you need to implement programming, and then you would need to evaluate that programming. You're talking about sort of systematic evaluations. You'd probably need a few of these types of sessions to unfold so that you can then compare and contrast and make some strong conclusions. So it's kind of a longer-term goal, but it's a very good one. So I'm going to go into more detail a little bit later. You can contribute feedback if you've been involved in this kind of assessment. That's one of the goals of this webinar today. Encourage people to share learning from these types of assessments.
The next question is about what's the outputs of a PCMMA and if it's the final report or if an agency needs to go through the process to use the results. So I'm going to answer this question myself and linking up with what you just said, Emily, about sharing. So actually you can use results of a PCMMA that has been done by another agency. As for a need assessment, for example, that could give information on the critical need of a population affected by a crisis, a PCMMA will give you indication of a critical market system in a specific area. So that's not agency specific. So you could really use Oxfam PCMMA if you are working with ACF, for example. And the point in this is about sharing PCMMA reports, as sharing a report has been done so far on the MIGD group and on the Pcmma website and other sharing platforms. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that in the next presentation. But no, you don't need to go through a PCMMA exercise to be able to use the PCMMA results. The next question is about selecting the reference year, about the type of crisis you can look at. This is going to go to Mary. So two questions. The first one is, how do you select a normal year in chronic context like West Africa? And if crises need to be predictable, does this mean that the PCMMA is therefore better suited or more useful or seasonal crisis rather than for humanitarian, conflict crisis, not humanitarian? Mary, the floor is yours.
Yeah, the question about how do you select a normal year in chronic context like West Africa. So it can be difficult, and as you say, it's also the difficult part in an Pcmma. I would say you start by defining your crisis, so the crisis that you want to talk about, you want to analyze, and having have factors that define your crisis. I would say that the normal, so I would not talk about normal year, because maybe talking about a year is for PCMMA is quite difficult, because you need to to have a snapshot of a situation at a precise time. So if you discuss, you need to discuss with the training participants, having local knowledge and having a very good idea of what the crisis means, and in terms of a year, when is that, and then you can decide. And when the study is not there, so I said in Niger, we were saying that we define crisis as a bad lean season, which meant that there a rainfall deficit, and so that kind of details, and therefore a normal lean season was when those factors did not happen. So when the actually last agriculture season was reasonably good. Of course, that's why we put normal in bracket, because we have chronic context of poverty. But this is comparison with the crisis time. So I would say that to define your crisis and then take the same time of the year to avoid the problem of seasonality, and during a year when the crisis was not here. The question was about if crisis to be predictable, does this mean that Pcmma is therefore or more useful to natural or seasonal crisis rather than human conflict crisis? Human conflict crisis is, of course, less predictable, but this is also not very predictable. The keyword here would be more about the recurrence, and if you the context, you have recurrent conflict when, well, you unfortunately know that conflicts are going to happen again. So in a way they are predictable, as well as a cyclone is predictable but also unpredictable. It's you rely on historic data here to do your PCV. So you on your good understanding of the context and historic data, and whenever you do a contingency planning, you know that in your context some specific crises are very likely to happen. So it's during also a PCMMA, and there are also some discussions about what would be the good crisis to it's not easy, so you need to train different things and the mandate of your agency, but coming into the picture.
Very much, Mary. The next question is a tricky one, and so that will go to Greg. So it's about how does the Pcmma tool in the opportunistic market players who only emerge when the crisis occurs and may necessarily be active in the pre-crisis period. Question.
Right, and I think the answer to this question is to the previous question around whether the Pcmma approach picks up different behaviors or coping behaviors in markets. And while if you simply do a baseline mapping of a market system, you might identify those opportunistic actors or those new actors who tend to emerge when an emergency happens or when there's a significant change in the market system. But if you look at baseline mapping, combine that with questions on how markets have behaved in previous emergencies, you start to understand and you can start to see patterns in terms of new actors who might be emerging. The example which Marie gave from Niger, I mean, if you're thinking about lean season, how do households access food, or how many traders are there in the market? The number might increase or different, particularly more stressed times as the opportunistic actors emerge and try to take advantage of higher prices. So trade about either how they will respond in a given disaster situation, or look back at recent memory how markets have behaved, you can start to pick out what some of the changes are, including new who might have entered the market system.
Greg, the next question will go to Carol, and it's about applying Emma or Pcmma in a refugee context in Ethiopia. Maybe Carol, you can share a few insights about applying doing a market analysis exercise in a refugee context. Hello? Okay, so question, if you are unable to speak.
And John, for the very complicated question that goes to my colleague asking this question. May help you identify existing market inefficiencies that contribute to food insecurity in a shock, or does it only look at how market systems change when a shock happens? So I think here, referring to market inefficiencies, and indeed, one of the strengths of Pcmma would be to also look at how the market functions in a normal situation. That's why we do the crisis time and the normal situation, and it's also backed up by the needs, by a needs assessment toward the target population. So you don't only look at how market system change when the shock happens, because you also look at what happens in a normal time, and often it will allow you identifying existing market inefficiencies that have the potential to exacerbate the issue during a shock. In Nairobi, when the Pcmma was done, the findings were that the crisis was already here, and people were in such a difficult situation that the conclusion was we should not wait until the crisis is here for intervening. So one of the strengths of a Pcmma is to actually identifying those market inefficiencies which are chronic, so in normal market time, and give you the time to before the crisis. So it has to be emphasized that we don't think only about preparedness and responding more efficiently during the crisis, but we also think about identifying those blockages, those issues that can be straightened for the market to shock or in a better way, and also for people to have to be affected by the crisis.
Much, Mary, and I think we have Carol back on the line to answer the question about the use of market analysis in refugee context.
Hopefully good. Okay, so when I was reading through your question, I guess a couple of things struck me. I think one of them would be something that we talked about a little bit about what is the most appropriate tool to use, whether you're looking at the Pcmma or whether you're looking at an Emma in sort of those refugee situations. So that would be something to be aware of, thinking about how imminent the crisis is, or we're talking about a much slower onset crisis, or whether it's something that that your emergency that you're already needing to respond to. But actually, yes, there are cases where we have certainly done a Pcmma and also Emmas in refugee contexts. Recently, colleagues travelled to South Sudan to look at the sort of markets functioning within, particularly looking at charcoal markets. There are reports available on that, and the Markets in Crisis D group that you can find out about. I think something that's really important to talk about here is the fact of the timing, and obviously in refugee camp situation can be quite fluid. Both the sort of opportunities with the system, the constraints, and how they operate under different conditions, which really helps in the PCMA that monitoring is a really big part of that, understanding sort of key parameters of market systems, and then setting up a monitoring system to register what is happening within those to make sure that you're responding.
Carol. The next question will go to Greg, and it's actually about how can PCMMA be useful in humanitarian emergency that affects several countries. So can be relevant, Greg.
So this is a really difficult question, and it's one that I'm not sure we really know the answer to. There's the question of the scale, can the PCMMA be applied? Does it work at a localized level as well as at a regional or country level? And things still hold. I don't have enough to support that, let alone to look across multiple countries and say, or region, and say, approach, can we scale this approach up to look across a region and anticipate how trade flows will be impacted and the potential impact of an emergency across a multiple country region. There's a lot of different factors at play there in looking at market systems across countries. And there's a question of what resources and tools might be best placed to do that. And there might be a combination of different tools and different analysis approaches which can be combined to help form would likely respond and what the emergency responses be more appropriate. That's definitely a really good question, and one that we're going to have to look more at. If there's anybody that has experience in this methodology across multiple countries, to share that. That would be great experience to have. The communities would love to hear that experience.
Thank you, Greg. The next question, which will be the one before last, will go to Emily, and it's about organization culture, saying that some of the organization prefer to do in-kind assistance from contingency stock or public donation, which can be an advantage because it's quick and dirty and gets stuff quickly to affected people. But it also has a negative effect on the local market. So, was this scenario considered during the development of the PCMMA, and could it be used to mitigate the negative impact of in-kind delivery?
Thanks for the question. I would say that this kind of scenario has been very instrumental not only to the development of PCMMA, but also to the development of Pcmma and other emergency market assessment tools. I think, trying to develop these tools is basically supporting increased market-aware, market-based responses that use local markets to the extent possible to emergency response. With PCMMA, the difference here is that we are getting before a crisis to sort of forecast how we may be able to use the local market. A sort of retroactive thing. We're really in a position here to be more prepared to use the local market. So I'd say while the PCMMA doesn't sort of focus on the impact of the market, it can be better prepared to use the market if you do it before a crisis and do it well.
the next question, we're going to try to squeeze all the question in, but that may be the last ones. Next question will go to Marie, and basically it's if we expect a region to be affected by a shock drought, for example, other region in country may not be affected by the same shock. Will it be appropriate to do a Pcmma for a specific commodity, knowing that the market may be integrated and trader may source commodity from other regions, including opportunistic trader we've already discussed about?
Who gave some of the answer in the question, which is if the market is integrated. Well, you talked about integration, and in that question, it says that knowing that especially commodities, traders may source for such commodities from other regions. So I would say there is something in the question that disturbs me a little bit, is that if a region is anticipated to be affected by a shock, meaning that we already know which region is going to be affected. So it's a bit tricky because we said that, well, P can be done only before the crisis. So we have to be careful about the fact that the crisis is not here yet. But with Pcmma, you'll get the big picture. So if there is in a previous drought, so the idea is to get the picture of a previous drought that's going to be that looks like the one that is forecast or that is predictable, then we'll get the big picture of what's happening. And so traders sourcing from other regions should be part of your finding. So if there is a drought in only one region of a country, it doesn't mean that you should not get the big picture happening and how traders are coping with that. That's actually one of the main findings of the Pcmma, knowing that to react, because you refer to this last crisis. So including opportunistic traders should also be pictured by the fact that you ask the traders, you ask the people what happened during this last drought. So they may be able to have the big picture and to know what happens. So that should not prevent you from doing a Pcmma.
The next question, which is very country specific, will go to Carol. So in the region in Somalia, most of the pastoralist population depend on the central market, which are not often affected by droughts. So if we are planning to do Pcmma prior to the drought crisis on pastoralists, how will you do it?
Okay, so interesting. We recently did a Pcmma in the city zone in Ethiopia, and we had very much this experience with the importance of the centre markets that were fed from elsewhere. To me, raises two different points. One is about the kind of shocks, understanding actually what these markets are vulnerable to, and the second is what you sort of analyse. So going back to that first point. When you look at the kind of those markets that are reliant on centre markets, you might need to adapt what your vulnerability for those people are. For example, it might not necessarily be the lack of rainfall. It might be house rises or border issues. So that might be sort of needing to adapt your scenario as you go along. Secondly, something that we looked at in Ethiopia, that we realised in Ethiopia, was although those commodity markets are very much internationalised and may not be affected in the same way, the income markets, so how people so that they can afford to buy these commodities, were affected by drought. So I think the Pcmma gives you the opportunity, as does the EMMA, to look at both income markets and commodity markets, and I would recommend that would be the way forward.
And very quickly to wrap up, the last question will go to Greg. So are there any examples where organizations leading a Pcmma have engaged with market actors just beyond just interviewing them during the study?
there are a number of examples of this, some of which are included in the tips from the field text boxes peppered throughout the Pcmma document. There's examples of incorporating traders into the market mapping activities, so asking them interview questions, but also engaging them in and reviewing them. And do they think these maps accurately represent their relationships? As mentioned, the question text, there's also examples of engaging, asking market actors or traders what they think appropriate responses would be to add their advice to what an actor should do. But I think another step of this, which the Pcmma leads to, is incorporate traders into the gathering processes. Do a Pcmma in advance of an emergency, you already become familiar with who the key actors are in a market system. You might even have their contact information already available. So when it does happen, give them a call. You can much more easily go back to those people. And this leads to some very interesting opportunities to engage the market actors into the analysis process itself. Feeding information on the market environment or the emergency context directly back to the organization that did the Pcmma remotely. They could be in feeding into early warning systems. Maria's presentation gave some really interesting examples of how the Pcmma can identify leading indicators for the onset of emergencies and enroll leaders into these types of data gathering efforts. Can the organization keep a pulse on what's in the field? There's a lot of opportunity to incorporate traders into the Pcmma and the market analyses processes beyond just data gathering. And there are great examples of this. You ask about examples of where this has taken place. If there are other organizations that do have good examples of this, please do. We'd love to include that into the discussions happening in the Markets in Crises D group, and potentially include some of those tips into the next version of the Pcmma guidance.
Greg, and sorry, Martin, for your question we haven't addressed. As said by Greg, we'll try to address it more afterwards as a follow-up. I'm now giving the floor to Emily for the final bit of the presentation. Now about the next steps for Pcmma. So, Emily, the floor is yours.
Great. I'm going to give a very quick overview of what we have planned in terms of developing Pcmma in 2015. I'm going to outline a few ways that you can get involved. So, one of the big goals for 2015 is to revise the Pcmma guidance document. So as I mentioned, the guidance that was published last year is basically, we think of it as a draft. Which is perfect, but we need to get something out there that people can start working with. So we're hoping this year to get a lot of feedback so that we can make it even better. So we're going to try to improve it in two ways. Both improve and make very clear the content that already is in the guidance, and then also to address some gaps. So where, for example, that both Emma and Pcmma are pretty blind. We'd like to incorporate gender a bit better into the Pcmma guidance. There are maybe other similar examples. So we're going to identify some of those and then incorporate them into the guidance document. RC and Oxfam are going to be taking responsibility for this revision. However, we're hoping to have a lot of input, as I mentioned, from people who have tested out in the field, and also from a sort of more formal technical advisory board. So this was sort of identifying learning objectives for the coming few months, and then extracting learning and using that to improve the guidance. Something that you're interested in, you don't have to be an expert at all, but that's something you could contact me about after the webinar, and we'll put together a list of interested people. On a fairly tight timeline, our grant for this ends in September, so we're hoping to start the revision by mid-summer, completing the revised version of the document by the end of September. So as I mentioned, we have this advisory group. We draw on other technical specialists for on gender, but possibly from other areas as well. The most important thing is to just gather feedback from people who've actually used it. This guidance document specifically, also as I mentioned earlier, we know a lot of people have, before this guidance document was available, have taken pre-existing market assessment approaches like Pcmma or perhaps or Mathira and applied them in pre-crisis context. We'd be very interested to hear from people who have done that as well. People who've used the Pcmma guidance, we have a formal feedback form. The link to it in this presentation, which will be shared afterwards. We don't have a formal feedback form for other tools, but we would be very, very interested in hearing from you, so you can just contact us and we'll follow up with you. Even though we were very involved in producing the Pcmma guidance document, we actually haven't carried out these assessments yet. In the first half of 2015, an ambitious agenda of completing 3 of them during the first half of this year. We're really scientific about it, and we have specific objectives for each assessment. I mentioned gender. We're also going to be looking at how to incorporate information communications technology better into these assessments to make it efficient. You know that the gap analysis piece needs a bit of improvement, clarification, other things as well. And again, that's something that if you're really interested in, that's something that the Technical Advisory Board is going to help identify. And then also running these as interagency assessments. That means once we finalize the locations for the 3 assessments, balancing that through the D group and through the coordination mechanisms in those countries, opening them up. So if other agencies who are working in those areas would be interested in participating, we're going to make that possible. We've created a mentorship program with 8 spots for interested people, many of whom are on this call today, people who have applied for this program. So that's another way we're trying to expand. We're definitely interested in building IRC's capacity, but it's in our interest and everyone's interest, we feel, if more people have these skills. So one objective of this webinar is to find out who is planning to do more pre-crisis assessments the coming year. So here's a very short list of the ones that we know about for sure. And that at the end of this webinar, through the poll, if you know other assessments that are up, with us, for reasons. So CRS has a couple of PCMMAs planned. IRC is going to be doing 3. The specific locations are still to be announced. Is planning to do 1 in Ethiopia and probably in other regions as specific countries request them. Please do share your knowledge coming up at the poll at the end of this webinar. So this is probably of most interest to you. So these are some different ways that you can get involved. Interested in learning more about PCMMA, developing your own capacity. Some applied for mentorship program. So that's we're hoping that these 8 people are very useful resources, not only for their agencies but for the whole markets community. Try to participate in other organizations' assessments, trying to encourage this sort of collaborative attitude when we're talking about market assessments. This is a field that has a huge interest. I think we in the email a couple of days ago that about 200 people registered for this webinar, so there's a huge amount of interest. There seems to be quite a scarcity of skilled market analysis, market assessment leaders. So this sort of into the next bullet point, which is if you're organizing a PCMMA, you know, to reach out and to use every PCMMA or Emma assessment as an opportunity to create new leaders. In a pre-crisis context, it's a more relaxed context, a little bit more time to sort of explain things to people, a little bit of extra research and analysis. So it's an ideal time to be truthful. Whether that means you'd like to concentrate on your own internal staff and just make sure that promising people are involved as critical market team leaders, or whether you open up to other agencies, please use these as opportunities for training. Share information. So we have a Markets in Crisis D group, which has about 900 members. So this is a really great resource, and these are people who need to know what you're doing and who may have things to share or ideas for you if you're struggling. So announce the assessment if you're planning on doing one, and share the report that you come up with afterwards, as well as the little bits of learning that come up. Participated in an assessment, you don't necessarily have to be the leader or the organizer. Provide feedback. We've mentioned this a number of times, but it's because we really, really want it. It's going to benefit all of us. Again, we have the official feedback form, and you can also just contact us directly. Volunteer to serve on the advisory board for revising the PCMMA guidance by contacting us. And you're learning with the community of practice. The community of practice has been, you know, to various degrees, I would say, through the past, since it's existed. I think we can use it more than currently as a discussion forum, as a knowledge sharing forum, as a place to really sort of have some interesting debates and interesting discussions. Some of the questions you raised today and other things that will come up in the future. Right, I'm going to pass it back to Helen for just some closing remarks.
Thank you very much to you all for attending the webinar. That's the end of it. A few things. So as a follow-up, as we mentioned earlier on, we'll be sending out resources, including link to the webinar record. So to share with colleagues or other people that haven't been able to attend today. We'll also try to answer your question. Final thing we'd like to ask you to enter a short survey or a short poll that appear on your screen now, or in a few seconds. Oh, there it goes. You basically have 10 minutes to complete the poll. So we would appreciate if you can do that. Thank you very much to everyone, and Paul.